Well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our annual Fredeen Lecture. My name is Marc-Andre Pigeot, and I'm the director of the Canadian Centre for the Study of Co-operatives. Today's talk is all about people asserting a right to exert some control over their own economic future. And I think that's an appropriate topic for a land acknowledgement, because for too long, the original inhabitants of this land were denied the right to chart their own economic course. And that's just one of the reasons why I think it's important to do that acknowledgement, to recognize that we come to you today from Treaty 6 territory and the homeland of the Métis. And in so doing, we pay our respect to the First Nations and Métis ancestors of this place. We reaffirm our relationships with one another, and we recognize that we all have a duty to make things right. So next, I want to say a few words about this talk and the Fredeen Scholarship. The scholarship in this talk are in honor of Hartley and Margaret Fredeen and their long-standing commitment to cooperatives. The family was greatly influenced by growing up in a pioneering community where cooperation meant not only a way of life, but a necessary condition for life. And so the family want to honor that history, but also their father's close ties to the University of Saskatchewan through his work with Agriculture Canada here on campus, and the professional bonds he formed with many students and faculty. Now, I understand today, I know for sure we have Art Fredeen here. I don't know if we have Ken and Shirley, but if they are here, I want to acknowledge them by welcoming them to our talk today. And I also want to maybe pass the baton over to Art to say a few words from the family's perspective. Art, over to you.
Okay, thanks, Marc-Andre. Yeah, I see my sister is online now. She's the elder among the siblings, but I can say a few words, and Shirley, you can chime in too if you want. But my parents were really felt the power of cooperatives. They've always thought that we should care for each other and held those views very strongly, and very strong feeling about the public sector. Not that there isn't room for the private sector, but really a vibrant public sector and looking after the interests of all people rather than just the corporate view. But and this talk today by Celeste sounds really fascinating. And I'm not sure, Celeste, if you're speaking from, are you in Argentina right now, or are you?
No, I am in Regina, Saskatchewan.
Oh, okay, right. So anyway, really looking forward to this talk, and I know my parents would both appreciate it. If my mom is still alive, but she's just her eyesight isn't good and she's deaf, so it really makes it challenging for her to listen these days. But but I know they'd be very pleased to see this topic, and they'd be very curious about hearing from you. So thank you.
Thank you, Art. And Shirley, if you're there, you're welcome to say a few words, but no pressure. You'd have to unmute yourself, however. Here.
Yeah, no, that's well said, Arthur. Looking forward to the talk. Thank you.
Thank you, Shirley. Okay, great. Thank you, Art, and thank you, Shirley, for those words. You know, it seems like your parents' mission is all the more timely in these days where we've seen some tremendous natural catastrophes where you know, you do see people coming together, and thankfully for that. So for this afternoon's talk, we'd like to ask you to please remain on mute, turn off your camera for the duration of the presentation. You may feel free, however, to turn your camera on for the question and answer portion of the event. That's going to come after Celeste's talk. And if you have any questions during the talk or the question and answer part of our event, please submit them to myself or Stan using the Zoom chat function. And then we'll call on you to unmute yourself, turn on your video, and get you to ask your question. If you're having any technical difficulties, please message Stan Yu via Zoom's chat function for assistance. So you can just find Stan by looking at the participants list. Now, with those housekeeping details out of the way, it's a great pleasure for me to welcome our speaker, Celeste Osses, the recipient of last year's Fredeen Scholarship. Celeste recently graduated and completed her Master's of Public Administration program at the Johnson Soyama Graduate School of Public Policy at the University of Saskatchewan. I had the great pleasure of having Celeste in my class. And in fact, the talk today flows a little bit from an essay assignment that she had in that class. So it's really exciting to see all things come full circle. Celeste previously completed her undergraduate degree in business administration at a Argentinian university, which I will not try to say. Celeste, I apologize. During her undergraduate studies, Celeste had an opportunity to engage with a local farmers market co-op for a research project. And that catalyzed her interests in cooperatives and increased her involvement in the cooperative and social economy sectors. In her MPA program, Celeste had an opportunity to research, as I was saying, maybe for my class, worker recovery enterprises. And that gave her an opportunity to kind of deepen her interest in this area. Like Hartley and Margaret Fredeen, Celeste believes in the potential of cooperatives to foster a sustainable and fair economy, one that puts life rather than profits at the center of the business, one that serves real needs, and one that empowers citizens to participate in a more democratic society. Celeste, we're really looking forward to your talk. Thank you so much for doing this, and over to you.
Thanks, Marc-Andre, for that lovely introduction. I'm gonna start by sharing my screen. Let me know if you can see my screen now.
It's great, Celeste. We got you.
Okay, thanks. I want to thank the Fredeen family and the Center for the Study of Cooperatives, the Canadian Center for the Study of Cooperatives, for establishing this award and for giving me the opportunity to be here to share this research topic that I am very passionate about. And the lecture is called Workers Recovered Enterprises in Argentina and the Challenges of Horizontal Governance. And as Marc-Andre mentioned, I am from Argentina, so part of this story that I'm going to share today is also part of my personal story. So this is the presentation outline, and the intent of this presentation is to define and characterize workers' recovered enterprises and their governance structure, to analyze the challenges that they face, and to understand how they overcome these obstacles, and they are still a current business model 20 years after their emergence. And as Marc-Andre said, the idea came from an essay that I wrote for Cooperatives in the New Economy, which is a course, an elective course for my MPA. And it's basically a literature review, but I also incorporated a Ostrom framework to understand the factors of sustainability of the workers' recovered enterprises governance practices. But most importantly, the goal is to share the workers' recovered enterprises case and to understand the diversity of experiences that the co-op movement can encompass. So what are workers' recovered enterprises, really? So as an initial definition, we can say that workers' recovered enterprises are a narrow subset of workers' cooperatives that emerged during the late 90s and early 2000s in Argentina in the context of a major socio-economic crisis. And this new economic subject arose as the result of bankrupt companies taking over by the workforce to recommence production in the absence of the previous owner. So even though these recovered enterprises are not restricted to the Argentine experience, they have become more visible and internationally widespread since the 2001 takeovers. There are reports showing their existence to a lesser extent in other Latin American countries, and more recently with the 2009 crisis in some European countries, they have paid renewed attention to this organization model. And I'm pretty sure that as we advance this and we move away from this pandemic scenario, we are going to see some other workers' recovered enterprises arising in other parts of the world, probably. And so the importance of this phenomenon really resides in that the case of workers' recovered enterprises in Argentina are amongst the most emblematic experiences of workers' self-management in the world, because of their unique social, political, and economic factors, their visibility, and their achievements. So to understand how these enterprises were recovered, we have to talk about the context. So during the 90s and in as many other developing countries, Argentina's politicians implemented economic reforms, economic and social reforms to advance free market policies like economic opening for trade and investments. But at the same time, there were some social reforms that slowly dismantled the welfare state that was in place. So as a result, we saw the debilitation of local industry, creating unemployment paired with a weak social network to contain the affected people. So as a result of this, in 2001, Argentina entered into a recession with, which led to a social explosion and rebellion, resulting in the president's resignation. And just to picture the dire situation, 50% of Argentines lived below the official poverty line. So people were not happy about this, so they demanded change. They expressed their discontent by direct actions such as street blockades, riots, protests, which started as spontaneous actions, but then they began to take more democratic forms, such as neighborhood assemblies and solidarity networks. So we see factory occupations, the workforce were resisting unemployment by occupying the establishments, and they demand their payments, and they were really protecting the factory. So the situation slightly changed in 2003 when a new governance cycle started because presidential elections took place, and there was a new government with a more progressive view. And this government, in order to guarantee social stability, sought support of certain protest groups. So that's the context for the beginning of the workers' recovered enterprises, which were, so at the beginning, it was really abandoned or close to bankruptcy factories taken over by the workforce, as I said. But even before the 2001 crisis, there was a growing tension among the workforce that notices deterioration of working conditions and owners' financial misconduct. So in some cases, the bosses were vacating the assets of the factory. And in most cases, I'd say that the workplace takeover began because of unpaid wages, massive layoffs, and factory dismantling. So occupation was resistant. Workers self-organized to resist unemployment, and they passed several months under factory occupation and without a solution to their claims. So thousands of workers restarted production, gradually taking control of the machinery, the buildings, the installations. And just to picture the situation again, the average of occupations range from 9 to 15 months. So imagine going over a year without any income. These people were really desperate, and they knew that they were likely not to find another job because of the country situation. So organized was the only option. At the beginning, the primary aim was to protect that source of income that they knew that they were not able to find another job, at least in the short term. So they were not expecting to control the company, but in the process, in this occupation process, workers developed new relationships of solidarity and more horizontal forms of organization. So we can see that from a spontaneous action, it became a social movement. This social movement was also materialized by an open factory policy, meaning that during the occupations, the factory became meeting places and workers supported other social movements, creating solidarity networks. They received support from the community and also from universities like mine, which help them develop their business plan, for example. And we can see here a picture. This is one of the most emblematic cases of Argentina. It's called Sanon. Sanon was the company name, and now it's called Facilpad, which is short for Factory Without Bosses. And just a side note, this is a ceramic tiles company, and it's located in my the small town where I grew up. So I remember my dad going there to get tiles, ceramic tiles for his house when he was building it. So the motto was occupy, resist, and produce. So by 2002, almost 100 of workers' recovery enterprises were functioning. So that paints a picture of the situation. So, but it was not easy to restart that production and restart functioning as a business again, because there were legal challenges. Of course, they were occupying private property that was contemplated by the bankrupt law. So they were resisting police eviction, and there was no legal framework under which the factory can be transferred to its workers. There was no legal status for the workers to operate as a legit business. So it's been said that there was a social movement around the workers' recovery enterprises, but within this movement, there were different views on how to move forward. So within the movement, one fraction pushed for state-owned companies under workers' control, implying that the debt left by the previous owner should be absorbed by the government and not by the workers. So this aim seemed a bit radical and extreme. So it was not very feasible for one fraction of the movement, which so in cooperatives, a legal framework suitable for the movement. And on the other hand, the government, to discourage more radical options like these state-owned companies, the government facilitated the formation of workers' co-ops. So that's where we see the workers' recovery enterprises fell into the cooperative bucket. So what the institutionalization happened through a modification of the bankruptcy law. So this modification permitted workers to ask for the continuance of the bankrupt company in order to preserve their jobs, provided that they conform a workers' co-op. So there was still no legal mechanism to transfer the property from the bankrupt company to the workers. The workers could continue producing within the factory, but the factory, it was not their own, right? So each workers' recovery enterprise must negotiate its own expropriation law with the provincial legislative and judicial power. So what is the environment for these workers' co-ops in Argentina? On a high level, workers' co-op in Argentina, it's a model that it's been used for many, many years. It's a long-standing tradition. The first workers' co-op in Argentina was established in 1928. And according to data from 2019, from the universe of cooperatives in Argentina, 43% are workers' co-op, which is a big chunk of the pie. So even though workers' recovery enterprises utilize the co-op organization form to operate, they present unique characteristics that are tied to the social and political context where they emerged. So the main distinctive feature is their governance structure, which is represented by two sets of organizational practices. One is self-management. This is an organizational practice, as I said before, that seeks to distribute authority, giving clarity of responsibilities and maximum autonomy to each member of the organization to exercise the control rights. So in my opinion, this is a very personal view of governance structure. I know there is, this could be a whole different lecture for this, but in this case, I'm gonna talk about this specific concept of self-management, which is the who controls the rights. In this case, is the workforce. The workforce is the one who is self-directing the work process, and the workforce is each worker member is not required to report to a superior, but instead they follow a set of rules and agreements that were made collectively. The second feature, and I think this is the most distinctive one, is horizontal governance. So if before we were speaking about the who, the workers, now we are speaking about the how. This is about the mechanism that the workforce create to achieve the outcomes and for that decision-making process, which if it's a horizontal governance, it has to be filled with collaboration, coordination, shared responsibility, and willingness to work through consensus. So this horizontal governance opposes hierarchical chain of command structure, and it's referred to this mechanism as well. So now we move on to how does this look in practice? First of all, we have to make a distinction with the co-op, the traditional co-op model, which recognizes two bodies of management, the Administrative Council and the Members' Assembly, being the Administrative Council in charge of the executive function, and the Assembly is held for extraordinary reasons only, but at least annually. So this is like the legal framework of the cooperatives. Conversely, the classic governance structures of the workers' recovered enterprises is characterized by the central role of the assembly in the decision-making process. And according to empirical data, there is a high periodicity of assemblies, with the majority of the workers' recovered enterprises holding assemblies monthly and even weekly. So another big distinction on how these enterprises work that is very characteristic is the reorganization of the production process. So this production process now convey practices as elimination of managerial posts, job rotation, equal distribution of income, and same working hours. And something that is very important here is to understand that workers promote the value of individual and shared responsibility and peer monitoring as collective norms of control of conduct to guarantee a successful production process. So the previous hierarchical control is replaced by informal social norms and by the introduction of internal rule book. This internal rule book is discussed and agreed by all workers. But at a personal level, something that is repeated many times is that each worker takes greater pride of their work and perform the task more consciously. So overall, there is a resignification of the workplace that fosters a collaborative culture. So there are points of convergence and divergence with traditional co-ops, but if we look at the definition of a co-op, we can say that according to the International Cooperative Alliance, a co-op is an autonomous association of persons united voluntarily to meet their common economic, social, and cultural needs. So they do this through a jointly owned and democratically controlled enterprise. So this definition encompasses the 7 principles of the co-op movement. And we see that this is really this definition is not contrary to what the workers' recovered enterprises are proposing. However, there are some authors that think that the voluntary principle is compromised because these workers' recovered enterprises are born out of conflictivity, and it's like they were forced to become co-ops. But in the way I see it, there is still a voluntary association in there, because they want to form that co-op. They have the option to step away, but they still did form that co-op. So I've been talking about the governance structure, but now we have to think about the challenges that this governance structure brings along. First of all, this applies mainly to that initial phase of occupations, where there was not really a legal framework with what the co-op the workers' recovered enterprise could utilize. And there was no previous experience to draw lessons learned from. So in the absence of a self-management model, they learned through trial and error, and the experiences were isolated until the movement was consolidated. Something that I spoke about too is the inadequate legal framework. We see that this brings property issues, because not all the recovered enterprises have achieved the expropriation law to own the establishments and assets. This also brings difficulty to access capital. They have difficulties to access those financial tools to invest and expand, which brings also difficulties to update the technology, which sometimes impacts the work process. So they have to work longer hours to achieve those commercialization goals. And there is also hesitancy to incorporate more members or workers. In this case, members are workers. Because bringing a new member in could put pressure on the production process to maintain these new job positions. And another challenge for my policy folks out there is one-size-fits-all policies, because at the very beginning, and especially during that initial phase, all the policies, incentives, programs were really designed for traditional co-ops rather than for workers' recovered enterprises. But I think we are better at this now, because the experience is more widely known, and there is more information and more data about workers' recovered enterprises. I'd say that politicians were able to make those changes now. And for external pressures, this is mainly the market putting pressure on the production process. And the threat is that the market could be the new regulator of the production process and the workers' discipline, right? So one could ask, with this specific governance structure and with these particular challenges, will the workers' recovered enterprises mutate to a more traditional co-op governance to survive, or will they stay the same? Okay, so I have some data to show here. In 2003, there were 160 approx. This is it could be not very accurate at the beginning of the process and at the beginning of their emergence. So we said that there are 160 approximately, and by 2021 we see over 400. And here we can see how the number of workers has increased over the years as well. It would be interesting to see each decade and what makes them go up. here. That would be very interesting to see if we compare that with maybe the different administrations that the country had and the different kind of policies applied. I will save this for later if we have time. And I will move on to workers recover enterprises now. So with the data that is present in this moment, we can say that they have duplicated in quantity and increased the number of workers members, as I showed you before. They have diversified to other sectors and industries. The experiences are more widespread now throughout the country. Before they were very, they were highly concentrated in those very industrial areas of the country, and now we can see that they are more widespread. And they were also able to incorporate new social perspectives. This is quite interesting. This is a picture of 2021 Workers Recover Enterprise. A few months ago, it was recovered by the workforce, but a distinctive characteristic is that it was a company where the workforce was mainly female. And also we see that they have incorporated more environmentally conscious policies. So the key finding here is that these workers recover enterprises haven't essentially changed the governance structure. They still function under a horizontal governance structure inherited from self-organizing methods implementing during the takeovers, and there is a high adherence to old organizing norms. Sorry, I have to take a sip of tea. So we can ask as well, how do they overcome the challenges and what makes them a sustainable business model if they have everything against them? And now I will introduce the Elinor Ostrom Common Pool Resource Framework. Elinor Ostrom is not her name is not here, but Elinor Ostrom was an American economist and political scientist who studied collective action problems and institutional arrangement for collective action. Basically, she studied how and when people cooperate and how people learn to cooperate. And so her framework on common pool resources is quite interesting. She defines common pool resources as systems that generate a finite flow of resources where it is costly to exclude beneficiaries, and the one person's consumption subtract from the number of benefits available to others. This is a very high level definition, but if we can think about a river that flows within a community, we can understand that if every person of that community uses water without thinking about, we're thinking in the long term, eventually that river will dry up, right? But if the community comes together to devise some rules about the water usage, that river can last longer. So she was studying that kind of system. This is a very simple example just to picture the idea. But Ostrom found strong evidence of individuals voluntarily organizing themselves to gain the benefits of trade, to provide mutual protection against risk, and to create and enforce rules to protect natural resources without the need of external intervention. That's very important to mention. So from this characterization of common pool resources, we can see some parallelism with the co-op movement. So we can say that the co-op organization is an institutional arrangement for collective action to manage a particular common. And going a little bit further, we can say that workers' co-op encompasses a notion of labor power as a collective managed resource that connects individuals in an organizational structure. But not all the cooperative arrangements can survive and thrive over the years. what makes them sustainable? That's the main question that I have. What makes workers recover enterprises sustainable? So moving on, this is almost the end of the presentation, so I don't want to get you, don't want to bother you, but these Ostrom observations, from these observations, she was able to assemble 8 design principles that characterize long surviving common resources systems. So this is 8 principles, and I'm going to try to go through each principle and see if we can find some workers recover enterprises characteristics that follow under that principle. So the first one is define clear group boundaries. And we can say that at the beginning, it was quite easy for the members of a recovered company, a recovered enterprise to define those boundaries, because basically the members were people that were resisting during the occupations together, and then they decided to form a co-op, as I explained before. But as the consolidation period comes, this enterprise should define some new group boundaries to incorporate new membership. So what the workers recover enterprises did basically was trying to find membership amongst people they knew. So usually these were family members. So the second principle is to match rules governing use of common goods to local needs and conditions. And for workers recover enterprises, this characteristic is present since the very beginning, because there were local companies before, and they were employing local people. And then when the occupations happened, as I mentioned, this open factory policy, these places were serving other people as well, other people from the community. And as the occupation stopped and it began to function as an enterprise, the workers recover enterprises also found a way to be connected to the community. And it's very interesting that nowadays many of these enterprises have established childcare centers, local clinics. They are used for cultural activities as well. So they are really in connection with that, with those local needs, beyond their members' needs. So number 3, ensure that those affected by the rules can participate in modifying the rules. This is done in workers recover enterprises throughout various mechanisms. One is the assemblies that are held periodically, consensus decision making, and also informal channels of communications. The design principle number 4 is to ensure that rulemaking rights for members are respected by the outside authorities. And I would say that this was if it wasn't because of the co-op legal framework, this principle was not attainable by the workers recover enterprises on their own, because when they started as occupation of factories, it was seen as very radical and highly politicized. So it is thanks to the co-op framework that they could attain this principle. Number 5 is develop a system carried out by members for monitoring members' behavior. And as it was said before, the traditional discipline and supervision is now replaced with individual responsibility and peer pressure and peer monitoring and internal social rules, as well as the internal rule book. Number 6 is use graduated sanctions for rule violators. And this is something that we can't really see in an aggregate view. This is very granular, and it pertains to each workers recover enterprises. So there is basically no information about the sanctions for rule violators, but we assume that they are in place. Number 7 is provide accessible low-cost means for dispute resolution. And here, this is interesting because we can say that the assembly is a good avenue for dispute resolution, but it's not a low-cost avenue. It takes time and effort to leave the production process to go to a meeting. So we can't really say that the assembly is a low-cost means for dispute resolution. However, the informal channels of communications are. And the number 8 is build responsibility for governing the common resource in nested tiers. And here in this principle, we can see that workers recover enterprises learn throughout the years to build those relationships with other organizations and representative organizations, such as Federation of Cooperatives, with other social economy organizations as well, that help them to protect that common resource. So almost the end of the presentation, as a conclusion, we can say that workers recover enterprises generate a new concept of sustainability. They have they incarnate up to some extent the 8 design principles proposed by Ostrom, and they have proven their viability while resisting market, legal, and political pressures. They emerge and operate not only in a socio-economic crisis environment, but this is seen because they have doubled throughout the years and they maintain their central principles of equity and self-management. And also, they find in co-ops legal framework a suitable environment to function and grow and maintain their horizontal governance structure. So the bottom line is resilience. Members generate with their practice a new concept of sustainability that implies the preservation of their job posts and livelihoods and resignification of their work by belonging to a radical movement. So that is all for me. These are the references, and a big thank you to the Fredeen family and the Canadian Center for the Study of Co-ops. And thanks everyone for listening.
Wonderful.
I guess we can.
Thank you so much, Celeste. So now we have a bit of time for questions. I hope you can stick around. It was a really nice presentation and fascinating. So much good material there. I'll turn it open to the audience, turn it over to the audience for questions. Again, just a reminder, you can use the chat function just to send your question our way, or signal us and turn your microphone on and video on and ask a question live, whichever you prefer. While people are queuing up their questions, I have one, Celeste, that's kind of burning. It's a burning question for me.
Okay.
So you had this great chart of the growth in worker recovery enterprises. Have all of the new WREs emerged as a result of a failed company, or are they? It's not clear to me that they're all coming out of a failed company that's been taken over by workers, or are some of them including new companies that are created by workers on their own? Or is it just the other, or is it both?
No, I'd say that mainly they are the first one. They are coming out of failed enterprises.
Right. And so there's been a continual number of failures in these corporations over the last 20 years. And I guess periodic of crises of some kind. Is that fair to say? I'm just really interested in the fact that the numbers have grown over time. It's not what I would have expected. You know, you would have, if you have a traditional formation in cooperatives, you think, oh, worker cooperatives, they're challenged, you know, by a lot of governance structural issues. But yet here they are growing. So it's really neat. And what do you attribute that to?
Well, first of all, I want to mention that before this 2001 crisis, there were workers' recovery enterprises prior to that. But in those cases, the owners were very cooperative with the workers to put that enterprise in function again, right? And in some cases, like from the universe of workers' recovery enterprises, 95% became workers' co-ops, but that slim percentage of 5%, they are something else. In some cases, the company was still functioning and the workers were able to buy shares.
Mm.
So it's very interesting. We have a universe that is quite diverse, and each case is unique. But yeah, I would say that most of them, they are bankrupt companies, and that what the law is providing to, like, an avenue for workers to recommence the production, because that company is bankrupt.
Right. Fascinating.
Otherwise, they can't really take control of the machinery and everything else.
Right. No, fair. So if people have questions, you can put it in the chat or raise your hand, please, using the raise hand function, and then we'll turn it over to you to unmute yourself and put your camera on. So
but Marc-Andre, it would be very interesting to see what happened here. I kind of know what happened, but I don't have enough scientific arguments to say that. But yeah, we can pair this with the different political views of the administrations of the day as well. That's all I'm gonna say.
Yeah, no, I'm just looking for raised hands or questions if people want to throw it into the chat. You're getting a lot of kudos here, Celeste, in the chat.
Oh, thanks. It's lovely to see all familiar names there in the audience. So thanks for
Celeste,
joining.
maybe you can go to your next chart, the one where you had the sectoral breakdown, and just talk us through that a little bit, because that was really interesting.
What I wanted to convey here is that it's not pretty clear here in this graphic, but at the beginning, there was a high representation of metallurgical factories and more factory-based, saying that the companies were manufacturing goods. But over the years, we see that this representation dropped down, and we see more and more services, workers' recovery enterprises that are service providers.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. And I also picked up on your point about the gender. A lot of the pictures you showed us of the early years were men, just men. Yes. And then the later pictures were kind of more women. So I think that was interesting too.
It's very interesting. And I would say that women were there, but behind the scenes, because during the occupations, most of the workforce were resisting with their families. Right. So sometimes they were the families there in the factories as well, helping out.
Oh, there's a question from Art. Okay, Art, go ahead.
Okay, great talk. I really enjoyed that.
Thanks.
I knew nothing of workers' recovered enterprises or Ostrom's work either. So I'm just curious about the access to capital. What kind of solutions have arisen in terms of how is there within these enterprises, is there the ability to put aside money that could then be reinvested in new equipment and so on, or how does that work?
There is some money set apart for investing purposes, but I would say that nowadays that after 20 years of the origin of the movement, there are more resources available to these enterprises because of that alliance with the co-op movement. But at the very beginning, it was a huge problem. And that's why the workers were pushing for an expropriation law, which hasn't happened yet. But yeah, I would say that the first years were very, very harsh on the workers, just to put that machinery to work, because as I mentioned, this happened because of owners' financial misconduct. So in some cases, they were vacating the factories, they were transporting the machinery to other factories. So in the situation that the factories were left, it was impressive. So at the beginning, it was very rough, but they would fundraise money. They would fundraise throughout universities, the community. Another practice that is very interesting, that because they did not have that capital to access to machinery or to access not even the materials to produce, the customers would buy the materials, would leave it at the factory, and the workforce would produce with those materials. So that was one solution to just to picture the huge support from the community. So as they could recover from that initial phase, and because of I would say that because of government policies as well, they would open up lines of financial lines for them to access once they become a co-op. But before that, it was very, very rough. And that's why I also mentioned the intensification of work. Some of the workers were there for 12 hours working sometimes.
Well,
yeah, I don't know if that answered your question,
yes.
But
yeah, thank you.
And every case was different too, right? So it's case by case situation as well.
Right.
Thank you, Art, and thank you, Celeste. Celeste, there is a question here from Ross. I'll just read it aloud, and then you can throw your best shot at here. So, Saskatoon Condo Board was dissolved this week by simple decree of a judge. Such a precedence could impact other joint ventures that encounter cash flow issues. And so here's the question. Could this draconian judgment solution impact other models of shared liability or operations like worker co-ops and other cooperative enterprises? It's a tough question. I don't know
because I'm not familiar with that, but I would say that everything impacts everything. I'm not pretty sure about their specific situation, but the environment is so interconnected sometimes that even ideas can impact other ideas and make things happen.
And I think we have time for one more question. I'll just see if people have a question they'd like to ask. Either raise your hand or put it in the chat, please. Celeste, I am interested in, and maybe it relates a little bit to Art's question. It does seem like, the growth in the number of WREs is both a function of economic circumstances, but I'm guessing there's also, and you kind of alluded to this, there's more capacity out there, both at the legal realm. So now you have a robust number of WREs. And so you build this ecosystem around it of people who have legal expertise, people who have experience running these things, people who have experience with horizontal governance, and that has its own kind of amplification effect. Did you get any sense of that from your research around that kind of that ecosystem that kind of could support the growth?
I do. I think so. Yeah, and as I mentioned before, that initial phase was very hard to recover from because the experiences were isolated. But now, right, 20 years after, we have some universities in Argentina working as observatories for workers' recovery enterprises, and they are now systematizing information and data, and it's made available to everyone throughout the web as well. So I'd say that yes, it's because of that. But also something interesting is that these numbers could correlate with the workers' co-op numbers in Argentina as well. I was checking the numbers for this last year. I was asking myself what happened with the co-op movement with this pandemic, and the National Institute for the Study of Associative and Social Economy, if I remember right, if I'm doing the right translation in my mind, they have recorded over 800 new cooperatives this past year, where in 2009 there were 400, 500, something like that. So it also correlates with the co-op movement a lot, I guess.
Yeah, very
That would be a good parallelism to do and to study as well.
Yeah. You have to come back and do a PhD.
Yeah.
I think that's what I'm hearing. So Celeste, thank you so much. I'm just going to pivot a little bit. And first, before I do that, though, I'd like everyone to put a virtual round of applause out for Celeste. And then I'm going to just with your there you go, with your reaction function. I'm also going to, or physically, that's great too. I also like to just take a minute while people are still on the call to announce the winner of this year's Fredeen Scholarship. And that is another USask student by the name of Bill Omakin. I don't think Bill was able to make the call. He's actually at a board meeting of the Farm Credit Cooperative in the United States. He's actually very involved with the cooperative movement there. And just a few words on Bill. His portfolio, his background is nothing short of impressive. He's practiced cooperative law for over 3 decades in the United States, provided legal and governance guidance to more than 66 different types of member-owned cooperatives across the United States. He's a recently constituted lawyer in Canada. He can practice law in Canada, and he's already building up a practice of cooperative law. And most importantly, he's doing his PhD at the JSGS with our policy school. And it's going to be looking at the challenges and opportunities around gathering data for farmers and the possibility of forming data cooperatives out of those efforts to collect data at the farm level. So Bill Omakin will be the person delivering the talk next year, and stay tuned for that. In the meantime, thank you so much again, Celeste, for really, really interesting talk. And I think everyone enjoyed it. Have a great rest of your day.